In a series of significant legal and political events, the Trump administration faces mounting scrutiny over its immigration policies, particularly concerning the deportation of U.S. citizens and its treatment of higher education institutions. U.S. District Judge James Boasberg recently found probable cause to hold the Trump administration in criminal contempt regarding deportation flights under a rarely invoked wartime law. This ruling comes amid growing concerns over the administration's handling of the case involving Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador. Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland has taken a proactive stance, traveling to El Salvador to advocate for Garcia's release from prison. Van Hollen characterized Garcia's deportation as unlawful and has emphasized the urgency of rectifying the situation. "We must continue fighting to bring Kilmar home to his family," he stated, highlighting the administration's apparent disregard for judicial orders in this and similar cases. Judge Paula Zinis, presiding over the case, expressed frustration at the administration's inaction, stating, "I've gotten nothing in terms of a response to her directives." This legal battle is not isolated. The Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies, including the potential deportation of U.S. citizens to foreign prisons, have raised alarm among legal scholars and civil rights advocates. During a recent press briefing, President Trump hinted at plans to send American citizens to El Salvador for incarceration, a suggestion that has drawn condemnation for its constitutional implications. Legal experts warn that such actions could undermine the civil liberties of U.S. citizens, creating a precedent for extrajudicial actions by the government. In related news, the Trump administration has intensified its conflict with higher education institutions, particularly Harvard University, which has publicly resisted a series of demands issued by the federal government. Trump has criticized Harvard, calling it a joke and threatening to strip the institution of its tax-exempt status as part of retaliation for its stance against the government's directives. Harvard President Alan Garber defended the university's autonomy, stating, "The university will not surrender its independence or relinquish its constitutional rights." This has sparked a wave of solidarity from other universities and political figures, including former President Barack Obama, who praised Harvard for standing up to what he described as an unlawful and heavy-handed government attempt to stifle academic freedom. The implications of these developments extend beyond individual cases or university policies. The World Trade Organization (WTO) has warned that Trump's tariffs could lead to a significant decline in global trade, exacerbated by ongoing tensions with China and other trading partners. The WTO projects a reduction in trade flows, particularly in North America, as the repercussions of these economic policies become increasingly evident. As the political landscape continues to evolve, the interplay between judicial authority, governmental policy, and institutional autonomy will remain a focal point. Legal experts and civil rights advocates are poised to challenge actions perceived as overreaching, while the ongoing dramas in immigration and education highlight the contentious nature of Trump's administration. Looking ahead, the outcomes of these legal battles and policy initiatives will likely shape not only the administration's legacy but also the broader discourse on civil liberties and institutional integrity in the United States. The coming months will offer critical insights as stakeholders navigate this complex terrain. In an unexpected twist in international trade dynamics, President Donald Trump has reignited discussions around tariffs, particularly with Japan, a long-standing ally that has been both admired and criticized by the administration. As Trump prepares to impose significant tariffs on Japanese imports, the relationship between the two nations, once marked by camaraderie under former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, faces a complex new chapter. During a recent announcement at the White House, Trump reminisced about Abe, who was assassinated 3 years ago, describing him as a fantastic man. However, this warm sentiment did little to mitigate the impact of the newly announced 24% tariff on Japanese goods. This move reflects Trump's ongoing concerns about trade imbalances and has sparked a series of negotiations aimed at possibly alleviating some of the financial pressure on Japan. Japan will now have the opportunity to negotiate for exemptions from these tariffs, With a delegation led by a senior negotiator scheduled to meet with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and others in Washington. This preferential treatment is indicative of Trump's mixed feelings towards Japan. While he often criticizes its trade practices, he simultaneously acknowledges its status as a crucial ally and a sophisticated negotiator. "I love Japan," Trump stated recently, while also lamenting what he perceives as an unequal security relationship where the U.S. bears a significant defense burden. His comments underscore a complicated relationship that has evolved over decades, shaped by Japan's economic rise in the 1980s, which many in the U.S. viewed with suspicion as a threat to American economic interests. This duality in Trump's perspective on Japan is evident in his administration's tariff policies. While he has suspended some broader tariffs following market volatility, Japan still faces a baseline 10% tariff on most imports alongside severe levies on steel, aluminum, and a staggering 25% tariff on automobiles. These tariffs threaten to destabilize Japan's economy, drawing expressions of betrayal from its current leadership. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has categorized the tariffs as a national crisis, emphasizing the urgency of the negotiations. Trump's approach to Japan is not merely transactional. It is deeply rooted in personal history and perceptions of power dynamics. His past experiences as a real estate developer in Manhattan, where he viewed Japan as both a critical investor and an economic rival, have influenced his contemporary views. Trump has often articulated a narrative of America being ripped off by international trading relationships, particularly with Japan. As negotiations unfold, Japan's strategy appears to involve leveraging its historical ties and significant investments in U.S. industries to negotiate favorable terms. Ishiba's administration hopes that by reiterating Japan's commitment to American business interests, they can secure exemptions from the tariffs, reinforcing the delicate balance of this allyship. The ramifications of this tariff strategy extend beyond Japan, affecting global trade relations and the political landscape within the U.S. As American voters increasingly express skepticism towards higher education and perceived elitism among institutions, Trump's targeting of universities, illustrated by his recent threats against Harvard University, further complicates the national dialogue. The administration's demands for universities to conform to specific ideological standards have sparked backlash, with Harvard's leadership asserting its commitment to academic freedom and independence. As Trump's second term progresses, the administration's evolving stance on tariffs and international relations will likely continue to shape its legacy. The ongoing negotiations with Japan and the tensions surrounding domestic institutions like Harvard are emblematic of a broader strategy that blends economic policy with political messaging. Observers will be keenly watching how these dynamics play out, as they will not only influence U.S.-Japan relations but also set the tone for future international trade agreements. The coming weeks will be critical in determining whether Japan can navigate these turbulent waters and emerge with its economic interests intact. In a significant legal development, U.S. District Judge James Boasberg has found probable cause to hold officials from the Trump administration in contempt over deportation flights to El Salvador. This ruling has emerged amid a backdrop of heightened political tension surrounding immigration policies and executive authority, particularly as it relates to the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland resident who was mistakenly deported. On April 16, 2025, Judge Boasberg's ruling followed a federal court order which demanded clarity on the administration's actions regarding Garcia's return. The judge stated that the government's actions demonstrated a willful disregard for judicial orders, and he is now considering contempt proceedings against the administration. This comes at a time when Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat, Maryland, is actively engaging with the Salvadoran government to advocate for Garcia's release, referring to the deportation as unlawful and an abduction. Van Hollen's trip underscores the ongoing political implications of immigration enforcement and the administration's handling of such cases. As the situation unfolds, it is also important to note the broader context of the Trump administration's legal and political maneuvers. Recently, A federal judge criticized Trump's executive order targeting a prominent law firm, characterizing it as a shocking abuse of power. This ruling reveals a growing pushback against what many view as the administration's retaliatory tactics against critics and political opponents. Legal experts have voiced concerns that these actions undermine the integrity of the judicial system and set a troubling precedent for the use of executive power. In another notable incident, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a lawsuit against the Trump administration challenging the legality of the president's sweeping tariff policies that are believed to be harming the state's economy. Newsom argues that Trump's invocation of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to impose tariffs lacks constitutional authority and has devastating repercussions for California, particularly as it faces significant economic challenges. The repercussions of Trump's tariff policies were echoed by Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, who noted that uncertainty surrounding these measures has raised downside risks for the U.S. economy despite its current solid performance. Powell's remarks reflect growing concern among lawmakers and economic leaders about the long-term implications of such trade policies. As the political landscape continues to evolve with mounting legal challenges and public pushback, the Trump administration finds itself at a crossroads. The implications of these legal battles extend beyond individual cases or state-level disputes. They signal a potential shift in the balance of power between federal authority and judicial oversight. Observers are keenly watching how these dynamics will play out, particularly as the 2026 midterm elections approach, which could further reshape the political landscape and the administration's ability to implement its agenda. In the coming weeks, continued developments in these legal battles and their broader implications for immigration policy, trade, and executive power will be crucial to watch. With mounting pressure from various fronts, the administration's responses will likely set the tone for its future interactions with both the judiciary and the legislative branches, as well as its standing with the American public. In a bold move that underscores the escalating tensions between state and federal authority, California Governor Gavin Newsom and Attorney General Rob Bonta have filed a lawsuit against President Donald Trump challenging the legality of the tariffs imposed under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act. Announced on April 16, 2025, the lawsuit claims these tariffs have wreaked havoc on California's economy, driving up prices, disrupting supply chains, and causing significant harm to families and businesses across the state. The lawsuit, filed in the United States District Court for the Northern District of California, argues that President Trump overstepped his constitutional authority by unilaterally imposing tariffs on imports from key trading partners including China, Canada, and Mexico. Governor Newsom emphasized the unprecedented nature of this action, stating President Trump's unlawful tariffs are wreaking chaos on California families, businesses, and our economy, driving up prices and threatening jobs. Bonta echoed this sentiment, highlighting the far-reaching implications for Californians, from farmers in the Central Valley to small business owners in urban centers. At the heart of the lawsuit is the assertion that the International Economic Emergency Powers Act does not grant the president the power to impose tariffs, a measure that is typically reserved for Congress. The act, which was enacted in 1977, allows the president to respond to national emergencies but does not specifically authorize tariff imposition. This legal argument is bolstered by the U.S. Supreme Court's Major Questions Doctrine, which requires clear congressional authorization for significant economic actions. As noted in the lawsuit, the tariffs have already inflicted hundreds of billions of dollars in economic losses, and the potential for further damage looms large. California, with a gross domestic product of $3.9 trillion and a pivotal role in national and global trade, stands as one of the most affected states. The state is not only the largest agriculture producer in the U.S. but also a manufacturing powerhouse, employing over 1.1 million people in the sector. The disruption caused by the tariffs is particularly concerning given California's reliance on trade with its top partners, which account for a substantial portion of its imports and exports. For instance, over 40% of California's imports come from Mexico, Canada, and China. And the state exported nearly $67 billion worth of goods to these same countries in 2024. The economic ramifications of the tariffs have already begun to manifest. Newsom noted that the uncertainty surrounding the tariffs has led to a decline in California's economic outlook, prompting him to revise the state's budget proposal in anticipation of higher inflation and unemployment rates. This situation poses a significant risk, particularly as the state relies heavily on income tax revenue from capital gains, which are sensitive to fluctuations in the stock market. In a broader context, the tariffs have incited a wave of bipartisan criticism. Notable figures such as Senators Ted Cruz and Rand Paul have expressed concerns that tariffs represent a tax on American consumers, undermining the very economic growth they aim to promote. The sentiment is echoed by organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Federation, which argue that the tariffs are a form of tax increase that will ultimately harm consumers and hinder economic progress. Recent comments from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell further underscore the gravity of the situation. He warned that the scale of the tariffs exceeds previous expectations and could lead to higher inflation and slower economic growth. The impact on consumer confidence has also been notable, with surveys indicating a sharp decline in sentiment regarding the economic outlook. As the lawsuit unfolds, it marks a significant chapter in the ongoing tug-of-war between state and federal powers. Newsom has vowed to continue advocating for California's economic interests, emphasizing the need for strategic trade relationships to mitigate the fallout from federal policies. This is recklessness at another level. The geopolitical impacts are outsized, he asserted during a visit to an almond farm affected by retaliatory tariffs. Looking ahead, the outcome of this legal challenge could have lasting implications not only for California's economy but also for the broader landscape of U.S. trade policy. As the state seeks to protect its interests, the national debate over the authority of the presidency in economic matters continues to intensify. With the tariffs already causing ripples across the economy, the stakes have never been higher for both state leaders and the federal government. In a significant development within the U.S. military and national security landscape, two high-ranking Pentagon officials have been placed on administrative leave amid an ongoing leak investigation. This move, reported by Politico, underscores the heightened scrutiny surrounding information sharing and internal communications at a time when national security is under increasing public and political scrutiny. The officials in question, both closely associated with the Pentagon's leadership, have not been publicly named. But their leave comes as part of a broader investigation that suggests a serious breach of protocol within the Department of Defense. The Pentagon's decision to act swiftly indicates the gravity of the situation, which could have far-reaching implications for trust and transparency within the military establishment. This incident coincides with other significant national security discussions, particularly regarding President Donald Trump's controversial use of military forces within the United States. On April 11, Trump issued a memorandum that expanded the role of the Department of Defense in managing certain public lands along the southern border. This policy shift has provoked concern from civil liberties advocates who fear that it could lead to an increased militarization of civilian environments and a potential infringement on civil rights. Hina Shamsi, director of the National Security Project at the American Civil Liberties Union (ACLU), articulated deep concerns about the implications of Trump's military orders. She stated, if Trump invokes the Insurrection Act to activate federalized troops for mass deportation, whether at the border or somewhere else in the country, it would be unprecedented, unnecessary, and wrong. This sentiment reflects a growing fear that the president may exploit emergency powers to further his political agenda, particularly against the backdrop of rising tensions around immigration and border security. The legal framework governing domestic military deployment is complex and rooted in principles designed to prevent the military from policing civilians. The Posse Comitatus Act, for instance, prohibits federal military forces from executing domestic laws unless explicitly authorized by Congress. Critics argue that any move towards greater military involvement in civilian matters not only risks violating these legal boundaries but also undermines the foundational tenets of American democracy that advocate for civilian oversight of the military. The implications of the Pentagon's internal actions and Trump's directives extend beyond mere administrative changes. They resonate deeply within the fabric of American civil liberties. The ACLU has called on Congress to increase oversight of these military actions, especially concerning the rules governing the use of force. Recent history has shown that expansive military powers often come with significant risks, including the potential for misuse or overreach, particularly in densely populated civilian areas. As the investigation into the Pentagon officials unfolds and as the administration navigates its controversial military policies, the intersection of national security and civil rights will remain a critical area of focus. The outcomes of these developments could set important precedents for how military power is exercised domestically in the future, raising essential questions about accountability, legality, and the protection of civil liberties in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. Looking ahead, the potential invocation of the Insurrection Act and the continued militarization of domestic policies will likely remain contentious topics shaping the political discourse as the nation moves forward. The balance between ensuring security and safeguarding civil rights is a delicate one, and the decisions made in the coming weeks and months will be pivotal in defining that balance for years to come. As the world adjusts to the ramifications of Donald Trump's return to the White House, nations across the globe are grappling with the implications of his unconventional approach to diplomacy and foreign policy. One country observing these developments with a mix of concern and pragmatism is Mongolia, a small democracy strategically sandwiched between two resurgent authoritarian powers, Russia and China. The complexities of Trump's foreign policy pose significant challenges for Mongolia, which relies heavily on a diversified diplomatic strategy known as the third neighbor policy. This approach aims to cultivate relationships beyond its immediate neighbors, but the unpredictability stemming from Trump's presidency threatens this carefully balanced strategy. During his first term, Trump disrupted the long-standing assumptions underpinning U.S. global leadership. His transactional approach to alliances and open admiration for authoritarian leaders unsettled many international observers. For Mongolia, which has worked diligently to maintain a neutral stance between its powerful neighbors, the ramifications of Trump's policies raise serious concerns about its diplomatic future. Our survival strategy hinges on an engaged international community and a predictable rules-based order, a Mongolian analyst noted. The unpredictability of the Trump era shook that foundation. Economically, Trump's nationalist policies and tariff wars could also have collateral effects on Mongolia, a resource-exporting nation vulnerable to external shocks. The rising tensions between the U.S. and China, if left unchecked, could destabilize Mongolia's economy, leading to further volatility amidst an already precarious global market landscape. Observers in Mongolia are particularly wary of the potential fallout from escalating U.S.-China tensions, especially since the country is economically linked to both superpowers. Moreover, the personal style that Trump employs, characterized by grievance and impulsiveness, has raised alarm among those who value democratic processes and institutions. As Trump continues to propagate unfounded claims regarding election integrity and disparages democratic norms, there is a growing sentiment in Mongolia that such behavior could embolden authoritarian forces, ultimately threatening the democratic gains achieved in recent decades. Despite the challenges posed by Trump's return, Mongolia remains pragmatic. The country's leaders understand that they cannot afford to take sides in the partisan battles of foreign powers. Instead, they aim to collaborate with any administration that respects its sovereignty and supports its development. However, this collaboration must be approached with caution. The unpredictable nature of the Trump administration has led many to view its foreign policy not with enthusiasm but rather with unease. Ultimately, Mongolia's situation underscores a broader theme in international relations: the importance of consistent and responsible diplomacy, particularly from a nation that wields significant influence over the global economy. As Trump continues to navigate his role on the world stage, the implications for smaller democracies like Mongolia will remain critical. The future will hinge not only on how Trump conducts his foreign policy but also on the resilience of international norms and the commitment of smaller nations to uphold their democratic values in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. Looking ahead, it is clear that the world is entering a new phase of diplomatic engagement, one that will require both caution and adaptability from nations caught in the crossfire of great power competition. As Mongolia continues to chart its course, the hope is that it can maintain its democratic integrity while navigating the tumultuous waters of global politics.